Okay, welcome to those of you here today, and welcome to those of you watching via the live stream. My name's Samantha Lewis, and I work for the British Council here in Madrid, and I also write materials for Cambridge University Press. So one of the latest things I've just finished working on is a course book for teenagers called Interactive. And when we were writing the course book, we wanted to include some literature, but we wanted something with quite an up-to-date feel to it, you know, in keeping with the style of the course. So we decided upon a graphic novel. So each of the 4 levels of the course book includes a complete graphic novel, which is divided into 3 parts. And the format of the graphic novel in the course book is very much the same as you would find in any kind of published graphic novel. It's just the story. It's recorded too, so the students can listen to it. But that kind of got me exploring different activities that we could use to exploit that material in the classroom, for teachers to be able to exploit the material in the classroom. So those ideas really do form the basis of today's talk. What I would say though is all of the ideas, I'll be using some specific stories to illustrate the activities, but all of the activities you can adapt and use with any story. So whatever it is, whatever kind of graphic novel you have to work with your students, you can adapt and use the same activities. Okay? So that's a little bit about me. I'd like to find out about you too. How many of you are working in secondary schools, teaching in secondary schools? And in private language schools? Okay, and how many of you have had the opportunity to work with graphic novels? Okay, not so many. It is a fairly sort of new resource, I think, that's creeping into classrooms. Okay, well, today's talk is, I've divided it into 3 sections. So firstly, we're just going to have a little look at what graphic novels are exactly, some of the specific features of graphic novels. Then we're going to have a look at some of the reasons for using them with students. And then finally, the main part of the talk is looking at lots and lots of activities that you can use in the classroom. And people sort of often wonder, well, what's the difference between a graphic novel and a comic? And there are lots and lots of similarities, and I'm sure, you know, most of us are actually familiar with the format of comics. I don't know about you, I imagine most of you used to read comics when you were younger. Maybe some of you still do. Which comics did you used to read? You used to read Marvel comics? Any others? I used to read the Beano. No, have you not heard of that one? Dennis the Menace and Minnie the Minx. I know that there are a few comics here in Spain which are very popular. Mortadelo y Filemón. That one's still going strong, yeah? And there are a lot of similarities between comics and graphic novels. Certainly the visual format is quite similar. But some of the differences, whereas a comic will tend to be maybe a sort of weekly instalment based on the same characters, a graphic novel is often a standalone story. So you'll get a graphic novel format of, you know, a lot of the classical literature, things like Shakespeare plays, Dickens novels, Frankenstein, Dracula, Jane Eyre. They're all available now in graphic novel format, along with more contemporary literature that our students are reading, so things like the Twilight series, the Alex Rider stories, and I'm sure before too long we'll have the graphic novel version of the Hunger Games. That will be the next one to come out. As well as sort of specific stories that are written first time as graphic novels. So there is quite a lot of material available that's sort of creeping into our resources, and they're becoming more and more popular in mainstream education, and those graphic novel formats are often available in the original text and also in simplified texts. So they're kind of there to help learners who perhaps struggle with reading a bit more, or are a bit more reluctant to read, more sort of A-literacy learners. But they're also very, very good for language learners because you've got these simplified versions to work with too. And another difference as well is that they tend to deal with more sort of serious issues as well. So, you know, if you're working with teenagers, that's quite a sort of accessible way of dealing with some quite serious issues in the classroom, something that they can relate to. Okay, what I thought would be useful for us, but also if you're going to use graphic novels with your students, so they're familiar with all the features of graphic novels, is to look at some of the jargon, some of the features of them. So I've put them up here on a slide. Can you see all of those words? You might have to. Okay, this one says thought balloons. Okay, what I'd like you to do with the person next to you is just to have a look at those words and see if you know what they refer to. Okay, I'll just give you a minute to do that. We'll look at that in a minute. Okay, I'm going to stop you there just to have a quick look through then. I think the two sort of main terms that most people are familiar with are speech balloons and thought balloons. Yes? Okay, because obviously one of the defining characteristics of a graphic novel is that they're using spoken language. So for our students, if you're going to be working with them in class, what they need to be able to interpret and then produce, if they're going to create their own, are the different forms to indicate the way in which the words are spoken. So if it's just plain speech, then it would have a solid line. If they were whispering, it would have a dotted line around the outside. If they're shouting, a big jagged line. And if it's just a thought cloud there. Okay, so I think they sort of translate from one language to another. They're quite sort of well-known conventions. And then another series of terms which relate quite well together are layout, panels, close-ups, and gutters. So we'll have a look at those. And what we have here are 8 pages of a graphic novel, and on each page you've got a different layout or organisation of panels. So some of the panels are rectangular, you've got square panels, circles and stars. And you can see that you've got a different number of panels on each page. So if you really want to emphasise the action, you would just have perhaps one big panel or 2 very big panels on a page. And within those panels you could have a close-up as well, so really to really emphasise, really focus the main action. And I guess if you were going to relate this to a narrative version of the text, you could say more or less what goes on in a panel is similar to a paragraph of text. So you've got a bit of background and one main piece of action. And then what we've got between the panels are one of the other words. We've got the gutters. Okay, so what they are the spaces between the panels. Okay, called the gutters. Why are they interesting? Well, in the same way, I suppose, that with a narrative text, you would get your students to read beyond the text and imagine what's behind the words. In the same way, we can get students to imagine what's going on in that transition between one panel and the next. So it's quite a good way of working on their creativity, their imagination. And one activity you can actually get them to do is to insert extra panels between the panels and get them to imagine what might be happening in those spaces. Okay. What we've got here then is a template, and you can see you've got different panels and the speech balloons and thought balloons. This is taken from a site called grammarmancomic.com. If any of you are interested in working with comics or graphic novels, it's a very good site. It's got lots of digital comics that students can read online. It's got little comics that illustrate different grammar points. And it's also got these templates that you can just print off and photocopy and use with your students. And they're quite nice when they're starting out with writing comics and graphic novels, because it gives them a bit of a guide to focus on. And then what we've got here in the top left-hand corner in the box here is what? One of the words from the slide. Do you know what they are? It says, one day our usual English teacher. The caption, that's right, that's right. So what the caption does is kind of give us a bit of background information about the story. It'll often give us a time setting for whatever's going on in the panel. And one of the sort of differences that jumps out at you in terms of the language that's used is, whereas in the speech balloons, obviously we've got direct speech, what we've got going on here in the panels is more sort of narrative tenses, past tenses. and the time sequences. So there you've already got something that you can focus on in terms of language with students, and if they're going to produce their own graphic novels, something for them to be aware of as well. Okay? So what does that leave us with? Which words have we got left? Motion lines and sound words. And these really sort of just bring the pictures to life. Motion lines are very, very simple drawings, very simple lines, but actually sort of give us some information about the picture. I think a lot of them do transfer from one language to another, whereas the sound words, those onomatopoeic sound words, tend to be different between languages. So I'm going to see if there are any budding artists here, and I would like you now to get a pen and see if you could draw some very simple motion lines to illustrate an explosion, a bad smell, something spinning around, a swear word, a fight, some splattered blood, and also think about which onomatopoeic words you know. Okay, they're often used in comics, things like boom, splash. Okay, you can work together with the person next to you, have a go. I'll just give you a minute to start doodling. Okay, off you go. You're very good at it. Okay, how did you get on? Okay, any good artists here? She's a good artist? Okay, well, I cheated. I must admit, I didn't draw these myself. But here are some examples. So you might have got something a bit like this. Yeah? The motion lines, these motion lines, vertical wavy lines going up. What else could they be used for as well as a bad smell?
For heat. I mean,
heat, that's right. Anything else? Okay, yeah, Smoke as well sometimes, Okay, you might have used different symbols for the swear word as well. Yeah. But you could get students trying out this kind of thing, getting them to draw pictures. And then the sound words, which words did you come up with? Okay, there are lots and lots and lots, and I think some of these tend to be different in different languages. So what you could even do is get students comparing the sound words in their own language with equivalents in English, or you could tell them a story and they have to choose the right sound word at different points in the story. You could get them sort of imagining situations when each of these sound words might be said as well. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to think about now then are different reasons for using graphic novels with students. And the first reason I came up with it is because they're fun. And every activity I've ever done using graphic novels in the classroom, the students really have enjoyed themselves and enjoyed working with the stories. I think they just provide a different focus, move away from the course book, something that they're not used to doing in class. And I think if they're having fun, they're much more receptive to learning as well. Also, because they're so visual, there are many advantages to the visuals. Not only the meaning, that's a big one. I mean, the visuals help the students understand the story. They find them attractive, they get their attention. They also help them to remember the story as well. So I think there are lots of advantages to having the visuals there. They're very, very flexible in terms of what you can do with them in the classroom. So you don't need every student to have a complete copy of the graphic novel. You can just use a few panels, and with those few panels you can get a lot of classroom time, a lot of activities out of just a few panels. And similarly, as you would do with a film or a TV series, you can just use a short extract, work on it in class, and then they can read the rest of the story themselves for homework. I mentioned earlier as well, you know, they're coming into mainstream education. They're also suggested if you're preparing students for the first certificate exam for schools, then on the reading list for the set books, they do recommend the students work or read a graphic novel version of the story. So you can sort of start them off, do some work in class, and then they can read the rest or other parts at home by themselves. They're also flexible in the sense that you can design activities to be done on an individual basis or in pairs or groups. And also you can use the same story with different levels. You just adapt the activities to make them more challenging or less challenging, depending on the levels. If you prefer other teaching approaches, you prefer sort of more task-based teaching, they lend themselves very well to task-based teaching too. And you don't have to just, you know, work on the graphic novel in consecutive lessons. You could sort of spread it out over a term. So they provide quite a nice thread throughout a term of classes. You can use them for developing skills, and I've certainly found that they integrate the skills very, very well. So whilst you're working on the writing skill, they're also practicing their speaking and listening. They're very easy to integrate the skills with. And there are certain areas of language which lend themselves very, very well to working with graphic novels. We've already mentioned spoken language. So all of those kind of features of spoken language, hesitation, ellipsis, exclamations, you can focus on those. But also things like in the captions, the time references. If you're going to get students writing their own versions of the stories, you've got narrative tenses. We'll come back to this a bit later on and have a look at all the different areas of language. And also, if the stories are recorded, and a lot of them are, then you can work on pronunciation with them too. Or they can act out the stories and work on their pronunciation that way. Okay? We've already mentioned this as well. They're a great way of getting them being creative, using their imagination, either by getting them to include extra parts of the story or not giving them the end of the story and they work out their own ending or an alternative ending. They're a really good way of getting them developing their creativity. And a good way of incorporating technology. So getting them reading digital comics online. There are lots of comic builders that you can get them to use online where they create their own comics, choose their own backgrounds and characters. And they also lend themselves well to sort of developing a web quest based on graphic novels. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next part of the talk now, which is what you can do with these graphic novels, or the activities. And I'd like you to think about what you can do before, while, and after you read the story, okay? And I've actually made this easier for you, those of you who are here. On the handout, I've given you an A to Z of activities, okay, on page 3 of your handout. So what I'd like you to do is to have a look through those and decide when you would use those activities. Would you use those before, while, or after your students read the story? And for those people who are watching via the live stream, they could just imagine the activities, and then afterwards we'll see if any of your ideas match the ones that we're going to look at here. Okay? So I'll just give you a minute or two, again, with the person next to you, to divide the activities up into the different categories. Okay. How are you getting on? Okay? Okay, good. Okay, we're going to move on. Okay, so these are my suggestions for before you work with the story. You might find that you've got some activities in more than one category, depending on how you use them exactly. But basically, these are the ones I came up with. You've got the letters there, so you can just quickly compare and see if you got similar ideas. Can you read them okay? Yeah? So basically what we're trying to do before students read the story is work on their predictive skills, find out what they think the story is about before they read it, exploit the visuals, the pictures, get them trying to guess what information about the characters in the story, trying to guess from the action, and also describing the pictures as well. We can get them actually describing what they can see, okay? And if the story is an adaptation, as I mentioned before, some of them are graphic novel formats of stories they may already know, to see what they already know about the story. So finding out what their background knowledge is of the story, of the topic, and trying to work on their predictive skills, okay? So that's what I've got for you to look at now. This is a prediction task. And what I've done here is I've just taken some keywords from the beginning of the story, okay? And what I'd like you to do is just spend a minute thinking about what you think the story might be about, okay? So if you have a look at those words, and with the person next to you, if you can try and work out what you think the story is about. Okay, so let's see how good your prediction skills are. So, what do you think? What's the story about? Give me some ideas. What you were...
A media company that tries to introduce computers to control the students, like a Big Brother scenario, into a school.
Okay, so we've got a media company trying to control students in a school. Any other ideas? That's pretty close, yeah? That's pretty close. You've actually got the story in your handout as well, so you can have a look at the beginning of the story here. And it's a story called The Memory Birds. And the thing I do like about this story is it does deal with issues that I think are important for us to be talking about with our students. So you've got obviously that theme of the media company, how much control they have over the information they give us, how much influence they have over our decisions, taken to an extreme in the story. But you can kind of pick up themes, discuss with your students the whole idea of how much personal data they store online and who ends up with that information, because teenagers these days are posting everything, their whole lives online. So I think it's something for them to start to become conscious of, and where that information ends up, and what the consequences of that could be. So it is a good story in that respect, because it features on teens, so they can sort of relate to it through that. Okay, if we move on, that's the story there, okay, that you can have a look at. This is another idea you can do, and what I did with this one was I just took the beginning of the story and I took out all the articles and all the prepositions and personal pronouns, and then I put all the rest of the text into this program called Word It Out, which is similar to Wordle, if you've heard of Wordle, the word clouds kind of program. And then it came out with this word cloud, which the more frequently the word appears in the story, the bigger it appears in the word cloud. So what you can do is you can give this to your students, and immediately there are some words which are jumping out at you. So I think you can probably immediately guess who the story is about. Who are the main characters in the story, do you think? Alex and Luke, the relationship between them? The brothers, possibly. Okay, what sort of topics, what are their likes and dislikes, do you think?
Football,
Okay, and then you could get students to focus on the smaller words and perhaps write questions that they want answering from the story. So they might want to know, okay, well, who's Chloe? If you can see Chloe written there. Or who goes to hospital? Or what happens at the concert? Okay? And then when they actually come to read the story, they can answer their questions. This is a blank version of the story as well. So then once they've made their predictions, they could then look at the blank version of the story and try and match their ideas, the words, to the pictures. So you've got that in your handout too. So you can have a little go at that there. If you want to look at this page now and try and fit the words into the pictures and try and work out what you think is going on in the story. Okay, with the person next to you. Try and work out who's who. Okay, so you get the idea there. They're trying to match their predictions to the pictures, and then finally, then you give them the story with the words, and they can then confirm their predictions or compare their ideas. There, they could be using language like, well, we thought that Luke liked music, but he likes football, or whatever it is. They can then explain what they were thinking and justify their choices. Okay. This particular story deals with a lot of, we were saying before that a lot of serious issues can be dealt with through these stories. This particular story deals with sibling rivalry, ambition, disappointment, friendship. So there's all those kind of themes running through the story that you can pick up on and talk about with your students. Okay? Another idea as well, also using the blank version of the story. This is another story, and what I did with this one, I actually used this one as part of a writing course. And what I got students to do first of all was to have a look through the pictures and try and pick out who all the characters were in the story and what they thought they knew about the characters. Okay? So have a look with the person next to you. Who are all the characters? Can you identify them? What do they do? What's their job? What information do you know about them, do you think, from the pictures? Okay, I'm going to stop you there, okay? So, who are the main characters in the story? Who do you think are the characters? An actress? How do you know she's an actress? Okay, what's her name, do you think? Ruby Red. Okay, who else? Who are the other characters in the story? Her agent, okay.
The agent and the director, probably, because he's not the same actor here. Different characters, no?
It is a different character.
Boyfriend.
The boyfriend. Any other characters? Okay. We've got journalists in there. We've got paparazzi. That's right. And towards the end of the story, a nurse. Okay. So another thing, so then what I did was I played the story for the students for them to check their ideas. So I'm going to do that for you as well now. And I'd like you to confirm your ideas and also tell me what's going on right at the end of the story. Okay? Takes... Okay.
When you're only 20.
What can you tell us about Crazy?
Do you know you just reached 7 million Twitter followers?
I know you're all desperate to speak to Ruby, but let's have one question at a time.
Hi Ruby, it's Dan Black from Top Music Magazine. Are you going to return to music anytime soon?
I'm hoping to go back into the recording studio this summer, once I've finished promoting Crazy.
And is it true you and Carl Wiseman are in a relationship?
You know, Dan, you shouldn't believe every rumor you hear.
So, is your answer yes or no?
Okay, Dan, thanks for that question. Let's hear from someone else now.
After the press conference,
I've just been on the phone with the studio executives. They aren't happy. They think people already know you're going out with Carl.
It wasn't my idea to keep it secret, Karen. I don't understand what the problem is.
Well, get used to it. They want it to be a surprise for the fans at the premiere. It'll get even more publicity for the film.
But I'm tired of pretending all the time.
You just have to wait one more week.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow.
Where are you going now?
I'm having another secret dinner with Carl, and I'm already late.
Don't
don't be long, darling.
Okay, I'll be there as soon as I can. Oh no, not again. Well, they won't catch me today. What? Where am I?
Don't worry, dear. You're in hospital.
What? What happened? How long have I been here?
You had a terrible accident. You've been unconscious for 3 weeks.
Will I be okay? Does Carl know I'm here? Where's my mobile?
The doctor will be here to see you in the morning. But now you need to go back to sleep. Good night, Sandra.
Sandra?
Okay, so were your predictions correct? Ruby's an actress? Yeah? Okay, does she have a good life, do you think? Any problems with her lifestyle? Are there any problems? Okay, yeah, so you could get into the whole theme of the advantages and disadvantages of being a celebrity. And what happens right at the end?
She has lost her memory.
She's lost her memory. Possibly.
Switch of identity, perhaps.
She's switched identity. She has no idea. Yes, it is. Yes, it is quite sinister what happens to her. And what I did was I used this as the basis of getting students to write a narrative story. So the next time they listened to it, I used it as a kind of dictogloss idea. So they just had to jot down as much information as they could. Not the exact words. I didn't want them to have the exact words because I wanted them to then try out different techniques of beginning a story themselves. So we just then focused on the first panel and they used 4 or 5 different techniques to write the beginning of the story, using, for example, dialogue. So they just wrote a dialogue based on the first panel, or visual imagery. So they described what they could see as a way of beginning the story. They began it as a personal story, repetition of verbs. So imagine a room packed with journalists, imagine flashing lights everywhere, imagine the hottest couple in Hollywood, or with a rhetorical question. And in groups, they practiced out all of these techniques. They then listened to the next part of the story, and they invented the end themselves, and they wrote the complete story on individually. Okay, so that was their project they had to do. And there are some examples. We're going to move on, though, I'm afraid, very quickly, because we're getting short on time. This is an extract from another graphic novel. Can you guess which one it is? Can you read the text? Twilight. It is Twilight, yes. So obviously before students read, you can get them to find out what they already know about vampires. They could compare the graphic novel version with the film or the book version as well. In this particular section, they could focus on negative questions. You could pull out some language too. Okay. These were my ideas for activities you could do while reading. I'm sure they're similar to yours. So basically dealing with the text, answering questions about the text, confirming all of those predictions that they'd made before they read the text, and also perhaps matching the pictures to the text. That's a very good activity you can get students to do. Or chop the story up into pieces and get them to put the story back into order according to the text. So for example, with the story like this one, you can take the text away and give them the text separately. I've actually helped them by indicating whether the words are spoken or shouted, or if they're captions. But if you took away the shapes, it would become even more challenging for your students. Okay? And then finally they get the version together. Okay, after reading then, these are the activities that I had. And mainly here what we're dealing with are more sort of creative activities. So acting out the stories, role plays based on the stories, and writing perhaps a narrative version of the story or an alternative ending, rewriting the story from another character's point of view, or inventing their own ending for the story as well. And also what I've got here is working on intonation and focusing on specific language in the story. So that's what we're going to have a look at now, all the different language areas that lend themselves to graphic novels. So we've already mentioned features of spoken language and discourse markers, reference pronouns, sequences, reported speech. They're an excellent way of looking at reported speech with students because they're written in direct speech. You can give them examples of reported speech and then get them to compare back to the text. And it's a very natural context to do that in. So they do, that's quite a nice way of working with reported speech. Description of pictures, so describing characters, describing action, describing pictures, all of that kind of language we use for describing. And finally, if they're going to be writing a narrative version, working with narrative tenses. So here, for example, we've got an extract from Romeo and Juliet, the graphic novel. This is a simplified version of the text, so this is quite a nice one to be able to use with EFL students because obviously reading original Shakespeare is quite difficult for them. And what you then do is you could give them examples in reported speech, try and get them to work out what the characters actually said. Okay, so Juliet asked the friar to shut the door. What did she actually say? Shut the door. So then we can go back. Please shut the door, of course. But then they can then compare the direct version with the reported version and try and work out the rules and the different verbs that we use when reporting, etc. Okay. This is taken from a Doctor Who story. Are you familiar with Doctor Who? And in this particular example, what I did was split it up so to try and get them to include another panel between the existing panels. So they're working with their creativity. And obviously with Doctor Who, you can include all sorts of monsters and strange beings and really let their imagination run wild. Okay, with this particular story, as I mentioned, I then got them, I told them the next part of the story, they read the next part of the story, and then they made up their own ending to the story. I think if you're going to do that, it's good to stop on a cliffhanger and then try and get them to sort of share ideas and brainstorm what's going to happen at the end of the story. And also, I find it quite useful to summarise what's happened in the story so far. So who all the characters are, what their relationship is with other characters, what happens to them in the story, and then any extra information to help them before they then finally plan the end of the story themselves. And also to look at some of the characteristics of writing a good story so that they've got all those to think about as well. Okay, how are we doing for time? Okay, this is an activity you could do to work on intonation. Okay, and what I've got is a short extract from another story. This kind of activity, before you do it, the students do need to be familiar with the story. So I'm going to play you the beginning of the story, and there are two questions for you to answer. Okay, what happens to Jack and what happens to Holly? Okay, this is in your handout as well, so you can have a look in your handout.
The Memory Birds by Antoinette Moses. Part 2.
Holly, have you seen Jack?
My brother? I thought he went to your house.
Jack was using the computer in my room. I went downstairs and he disappeared. There were pictures of feathers on the screen.
So what happened? I don't understand.
I don't know, but...
What?
We were going to find out about the memory birds.
The memory birds? I'll type it in. That must be what Jack did.
Holly, what are you doing?
What are the memory birds?
Don't do that. It's not safe.
It's okay. Compop knows everything. They'll find Jack.
Holly, Compop is more dangerous than you think. Please don't do this.
You're not well, Mia. You should go to the hospital.
What are you talking about?
The computer says Jack left school. He works for Compop. You can't remember because you are ill.
I'm not ill. Jack's gone, and I want to know about the memory birds. Give me the computer.
What are you doing, Mia? Get off! Ah!
Holly!
Help me!
Okay, so what happened to Jack?
The same as to Holly.
The same as to Holly. They disappeared where? Where did they disappear? Through the computer. Okay, and then what happens? All sorts of things. Okay, well what you can do, I mean similarly with any sort of short dialogue from a film clip or from a TV series, is once the students are familiar with the dialogue, you can then get them to mimic the dialogue. So that's what we're going to do now. It's a technique called shadow reading, okay? So I'm going to ask you to work in pairs again. One of you is A and one of you is B, okay? If you're student A, can you put your hands up? If you're student A, who's going to be an A? Okay, I want you to speak at the same time as Mia. So you say exactly the same words that Mia says at the same time. And who's B? Okay, I want you to say exactly the same words that Holly says at the same time. Okay, so Mia, are you ready? You're first up, yeah? Okay.
The Memory Birds by Antoinette Moses.
Okay, Mia?
Part 2.
Holly, have you seen Jack? My brother?
I thought he'd gone to your house.
Jack was using the computer in my room. I went downstairs and he disappeared. There were pictures of feathers on the screen.
So what happened? I don't understand.
I don't know, but what? We were going to find out about the memory birds.
The memory bird?
Okay, with this you just need a very short dialogue, okay, because then the idea is you go back and play it again, but this time you turn the volume down slightly. So while students can hear it, it's kind of keeping their rhythm and intonation the same as the speakers. But the more confident they get, then you can just play around with the volume and lower it until finally you play it without the volume, and the students just have the dialogue by themselves, and you will find that they will mimic the accents that they hear. So it's a very fun way for them to practice a bit of intonation. Okay. Okay, moving on. We mentioned this at the start. There are a lot of digital comic builders online that you can get your students writing their own, making their own comics. This is one called makebeliefscomics.com. I think you've got the link on your handout. If you're just starting, you could just get them to perhaps make a joke as a comic, because that would just be maybe just 4 panels. And the more experience they get, the more confidence they get, they can make bigger comics. We've actually got a comic builder as part of the course as well. So all of the characters from all 4 levels with all the backgrounds are in a program, and the students can choose their own layouts, they can choose their own backgrounds, characters, speech bubbles, sound effects, and print out their own comics. So that's quite a nice activity they can do for homework, or something you can do sort of on an ongoing basis in groups in class. And just to tell you, we have a page on Facebook where you can come along, and we have links to articles and ideas that you can consult. And if anybody would like to get in touch with me, that's my email address here. If anybody would like the handout, people who are watching on the live stream, then if you email me, I can also send you a copy of the handout. And thank you very much for coming. Thank you.